Good evening, and welcome everybody. See, there's three people already in the chat here, so I'm also gonna put in here chatting with you guys. And thank you for joining this particular live stream. Where, well, now when I created this live stream, this wasn't the original idea, but things come up, things happen, and so principally, the whole purpose of this was to start reviewing, giving a review, a summary, basically, of the volume two of my three-part book series that I've been reading, the audio readings on my channel. And so after we finish each one, I always give a little kind of review of each chapter, what it was about, and that way to create a little bit of interest in others that would like to listen. All of the audio readings are on the channel since the volume one, all of volume one, volume two. Now we just finished, and so in a while we'll be starting the third and final volume in the trilogy. Also, as things came up very recently, if you saw on my community posts, this will also kind of double as, kind of a way to hopefully do a little bit of fundraising for my dad, even though I'm very limited as to what I can do to help him. But my dad has helped me innumerable times throughout the years, and if there's anything I can do to, at least in a small part, try to help him as well. So my dad, just in the last week or so, had a basal cell carcinoma removed from his face, and I just found out because I called him yesterday on Saturday. I hadn't talked to him in about 2 weeks, and I thought, I need to call him up because we haven't talked in a while. And the image came up, and he looked like he'd been in a boxing match. He was all swollen up, black and blue, and I see this thing on his face, and I'm like, holy cow, what's going on? And so, little bit of backstory on that. Many years ago, 30 some years ago, when my dad was in 42 years old, somewhere in there, I was probably 8, 9 years old. My dad had throat cancer, which was, a pretty serious situation that he went through at that time. That was a major, surgery. And then he had 30 some radiation treatments at that time. And it really affected his health. Thankfully, he recovered from that, but the radiation gave him a lot of side effects after that, and one of them being that it destroyed his taste. My dad practically doesn't have any taste anymore, his taste buds. And also it affected his teeth a lot. He actually, it was actually a miracle that he kept his teeth, because his dentist helped him to develop this kind of special mouthwash that he used for years that really extended the life of his teeth. Basically, his teeth were going to rot because he really had a hard time producing saliva anymore, and his mouth would get really dry, and it would lead to his teeth kind of basically rotting. And in recent years, he's lost quite a few teeth, but I mean, considering they lasted a long time. So interestingly, when this situation came up now, or they detected this basal cell carcinoma on his face, in his case, it can have several causes. That can come from UV exposure, being outside a lot, things like that. But in his case, this is unfortunately a side effect from the radiation that he had at that time. So it saved him from that particular situation, and it has ended up causing cancer again, which, like I said, when you look at it, you balance things out. Well, 30 years later, I mean, he was healthy for a long time. So I guess we can't complain, but it's hard. It's still hard. My dad is 72 now, 72 years old, and um, it's really tough. It's really tough. As I mentioned before, with the situation going on right now in the country, with the administration that's running things right now, they lost my dad and his current wife lost their health insurance. It got canceled for like seniors, so he had to basically look for another uh, health insurance, and it's not as good as the other one. It doesn't cover as many things. He's got higher premiums. So it's a situation. What can you do? What can you do? So they're dealing with that right now. He got an infection. They got infected, and they put him on antibiotics, and so that's what's going on right now. So it's a tough situation. It's a tough situation to be facing right now. After all of these years, like I said, when he had the throat cancer the first time, and I remember all of that very clearly. It was a really, really tough situation. You don't think you're going to go through that again, once you beat cancer, and it's really hard to experience it again, and you get all these emotions come back. So that's what's going on with him, and that's why I put the community posts up explaining that. How can you help out? How can you contribute? Well, on the live stream down at the bottom next to the chat field there are the super thanks. You can donate there. Any amount, doesn't matter. It's appreciated. The channel has memberships. You can become a member of the channel, have little other perks. And if you go on the channel where the information tab is, what explains a little bit more about the channel, there's some other donation options there as well. So like I said, I'm using my channel as another way to try to do something for him, to try to get something together for him, to send it to him. Because like I said, over the years, my dad has been a huge support to me, and at this point in his life, and sadly, because of the situation with being ex-witnesses, my two brothers who are still witnesses don't have any contact with them. So when these kind of situations come up, you really feel alone. You really feel alone, and it's sad. So that's what's going on. So that's the situation. So again, there's the super thanks. You can take advantage of that. There's the channel membership. There's other donation options on the channel. You can go check that out. So anyway, let's get into this. Say hi in the chat if you have any other questions about that situation, about my dad, or about anything else we're going to talk about right now this evening with the review of this of volume 2 of the Neothite Chronicles, which volume 2 is called the Neothite Conspiracy. Okay, feel free to ask questions if there's something you were wondering about or want to know about. And you can ask any other question as well. If you have JW related questions, it doesn't matter. Okay, this is an open discussion. I mean, I have a theme here, but don't think you have to stick just to that. So feel free to interact with each other in the comments. Feel free to say hi and make any comments and questions and anything else. So let's get right into it. So what I want to start out with is that if you've been following the other stories, okay, if you listen to volume 1, if not, you can still go back and listen to it, and this will help you out a little bit. In fact, if you haven't listened to volume 1, then this might be kind of a spoiler for you, so you might not want to listen to this. But if you do, just letting you know it's a spoiler. At the end of volume 1 of the Neothite Chronicles, which is called Cosmic Destiny, okay, at the end of the story, it was an open ending. It was kind of a cliffhanger. So apparently what you're led to believe at the end of the story is that Captain Wallace, John Wallace, commits suicide. Okay, after several years of being marooned on this planet where he crashed, he gets to the point where, he's been alone. He knows in his mind that nobody knows where he is. Nobody's going to find him. And he manages to do pretty well despite that. But in the end, when the climate changes happen on the planet, the seasonal changes, the damaged part of the ship starts to fill up with water because of the rain. And then subsequently, the next seasonal changes, the tundra, it freezes, and that causes warpage in the bulkhead doors. And then the next thaw, the water starts to leak in, and eventually it burns out the tram, which is a kind of a train system that takes them around the ship. And then it gets into crawl spaces. Long story short, ends up blowing out the engine, the electrical part. And once again, he finds himself in a ship with no power, he's got no way he can't talk to the AI computer, which is Ari, right? He can't cook, he can't do anything. And at that point, it's just like, it was too much, right? It's too much for him. It's like, now with the amount of damage that was done by the water getting in there, he can't fix it this time. He managed to fix it the first time when he crashed. But after that, it just wasn't going to happen. So that's where the first part leaves off. Okay, the first part of the story leaves off, and he goes down to the cave, rigs up this little contraption to inject himself, and as far as he's dead. Okay, so it's left there at the end where this seemingly, you don't really know what it is or who they are, but it seems like a rescue party. Okay, now if you already followed the volume 2, then you know who those people were, right? There's some little clues in volume 1 at the end there in the epilogue where it says that they were wearing older looking spacesuits. Okay, there's a reason for that. That was a little like Easter egg. They find him. They say, "Oh, we found them." Like they found the Phoenix, the ship, and they found Captain Wallace. Okay, and that'll play into the volume 2, the Neothite conspiracy, of who those people are and what actually happened. So in chapter 1 of the Neothite conspiracy, volume 2 of the Neothite Chronicles, is called Retreat. Okay, chapter 1 is called Retreat, and it takes us to Washington State in the United States, and you get kind of this ambiguous, there's a car going up the 101 freeway. These are real places. That's a real or highway, freeway, whatever it is. That's a real place. Skokomish, Shelton, Hoodsport, all those little towns along, the Hood Canal. Those are all real places. And then it turns off. The car turns off onto a side road, goes around Lake Cushman up towards Mount Eleanor, and comes to a cabin, an abandoned cabin way out there, way up by Mount Eleanor. And the driver gets out, goes into the cabin, and then as this person drops their duffel bag on the ground, you see a name tag on the duffel bag, Winters. So it's Sarah Winters. We get introduced to her again. So now what happened to her, we get to find out kind of the aftermath, the follow-up, what happened to her. At the end of the other story, it said they all disappeared. Everybody from Mission Phoenix, the ones who were commissioned to go out and try to find out what happened to John Wallace and the Phoenix, we know that abruptly that mission was canceled all of a sudden, and all of them disappeared. Sarah Winters, Dr. Benson, Benny Benson, Dr. Remy, all of them disappeared. Okay, so now we get reintroduced to Sarah Winters now. Evidently, she's decommissioned. She goes back home to Washington State, to her family, is this cabin that's been passed down through the generations from her great-grandfather, her grandfather, her father, then to her. And so we find out that Sarah got sent back home and basically debriefed at the Pentagon, and they told her more or less she was not to talk about the Mission Phoenix with anybody. She was not to contact anyone from her former team. And basically, they prohibited her from any social media. They prohibited her from any cell phone use or interviews or books or anything. No book deals, no nothing. Can't talk about it. So basically, they want her to disappear and just be out of the public eye completely. Okay. So we see a little bit of her daily routine, getting this cabin back up to par, cleaning everything up, getting the power back on. She finds in the back, go out the back door of the cabin, there's this other little shed and another little like mini kind of a office, looks like a mini cabin. And inside of that, there is an old ham radio. And then she finds another in the other shed that's padlocked. She doesn't remember what's in it because she says that when she was a child, her grandfather and her father never let her in there. So she opens it up. There's all these barrels of gasoline in there, 55-gallon drums of gasoline. And there's a generator. And evidently, the other little mini cabin is run by generator. It's not on the grid because if you remember in the book, it says that anything that uses neothite can be traced. Okay, it's all registered and traced to an owner, like the neothite chip in her truck can be traced. So the ham radio is not on that grid. Okay, can't be traced. Okay, so we see that basically she's thinking about what happened. She sits down in front of the fire, thinking about what happened to her life, always thinking about John Wallace. Obviously, there's kind of we get this idea that there's a love interest there between the two of them, but they never said it to each other. They never talked about it. And, Sarah's kind of having regret and thinking about, she should have said something. If she only would have known, maybe he felt the same way, but now she'll never know. Right. Okay. So we get to chapter 2. Chapter 2. This is very interesting. If you're reading the book, Krieger Wahrheit. Okay, Krieger Wahrheit. All of the names in this story that are like weirder names, and you're going to see some more in the third and final part, the third volume of this trilogy. All these names have meanings. There's a reason behind it. So what I did was, while I was writing these stories, for example, I had this idea in my head for this kind of eccentric, kind of crazy conspiracy theorist guy, living up in the mountain on a lake with a radio show inside of his house and talking about conspiracies and things like that. So kind of the crazy conspiracy guy with the radio program. And I wanted to come up with a name, a really weird name that had something to do with truth and exposing truth and things like that. Someone who was courageous and valiant. So I went online and I started looking for words like courage, valor, or warrior, truth in different languages. And so I would pull up on Google those words in a list of different languages, and I would just start reading them just to see which one sounded cool, which one sounded unique. Okay, so first of all, I pretty much came up with the two names that are German. These are German words. Okay, Krieger means warrior in German, and Wahrheit is truth. Okay, truth. So it's warrior, truth, or truthness, right? Something along those lines. So he's a warrior of truth. That's what Krieger Wahrheit is. Excuse me. So we see at the beginning of chapter 2, Sarah goes down to Shelton, the little town of Shelton, to get supplies. She needs supplies for her cabin. So she goes down there. Myrtle's Diner becomes kind of a central point in the story where she used to go there as a child. Her dad or her grandfather would take her there when they would go into town to get supplies. And so she sees that some things have changed in Shelton over the years. She hasn't been to that cabin in like 20 years. Some things have changed, but Myrtle's Diner is pretty much the same. So we get introduced to the owners of of Myrtle's diner. Myrtle is the wife. Okay, and uh, so Mrs. Gray, Mr. and Mrs. Gray, Myrtle Gray, and she goes there and she overhears the owners talking. They're much older now, and they're talking about, Mr. Gray is talking about, he was talking to a friend and how the real estate prices around Lake Cushman were so high now, and he said that the only thing he really knew of was farther up by Mount Eleanor was the old Winters cabin, but he said that's been abandoned for years, and who knows who owns it now. And Sarah's ears kind of perk up, and she says it's not for sale. And they kind of, they're startled. They turn around and look at her, and they're like, "Oh, how do you know that? Who are you?" Right? And she says, "Well, I'm Abram Winter's granddaughter." Right? And so they're like, "Oh my God, that's little Sarah," and they recognize her, and so Mr. Gray, the owner, goes back to whatever he's doing, and he's kind of with his back to her, and he's talking to her, and he says, "Hey, speaking of that, weren't you involved in that whole Wallace deal and all of that?" And next thing he knows, she's already out the door. She's gone, because when she goes back to her cabin, that's exactly the kind of attention that she wanted to avoid, right? She wanted to avoid that. And so she goes back and is like, "Man, I got to be more careful, because people are going to recognize her. They're going to recognize her name anyway, and they're going to be curious." Remember, she's not really supposed to talk about what happened with Mission Phoenix and all of that. So she decides to get a bunch of supplies and try to minimize how many times she needs to go into town and, be with people and everything. Okay. And then in the evening, that's what brings us to the introduction to Krieger Warheit, which is his radio program. Okay. All Things Conspiracy with Krieger Warheit. So this kind of crazy guy comes on the radio and gets her attention because he's talking about the disappearance of the Phoenix and John Wallace, how it doesn't add up, and he doesn't like it. It gives him a bad feeling. And then, of course, what happened to Mission Phoenix? What happened to Sarah Winters? What happened to, this crew that was supposedly looking for the Phoenix, trying to unravel that mystery? And of course, that was in the news and it was on social media, and then all of a sudden, boom, it just disappeared. They stopped talking about it. They, nobody. It was over, done. Okay. And so he's talking about that and doesn't make sense. And Sarah is really paying attention to the program. She's interested now. And then he kind of drops a bombshell. And he says that he got this inside information that Dr. Sasha Malenkov also disappeared. And he says, if you don't remember who that is, Sasha Malenkov was the Russian nuclear engineer who was the director of Eon 1. Eon 1 was one of the refinement facilities in space where they would refine neothite, the neothite mineral. And in this case, that was the route that Wallace would run from, with Sarah and everybody else way back in the day. For 30 years, they ran this route between Proxima Centauri B and Eon 1, which is way out there in the middle of space, in middle of nowhere, right? And so he got removed from his position and just disappeared. And so Krieger's asking, what does Malenkov have to do with all of this? And of course, Sarah says nothing, right? He has not. So now she's wanting to speak to Krieger about this whole thing and kind of tell him what's going on, but she's scared. She's scared because, she basically got threatened by the Pentagon. Don't talk to anybody, leave it be, and she's got no internet access, no cell phone, nothing. But then she kind of thinks about it and says, well, technically they told me not to speak to my other team members, right, from Mission Phoenix. They didn't say anybody else. So she kind of finds a technicality. So she goes to find, at the very end of the program, after Krieger says that possibly Malenkov has been spotted in Portland, Oregon, which is where he used to live, and he was possibly living there. He was homeless now, out on the streets, but that was like it was unconfirmed. Okay, it was like gossip basically, but he was talking about possibly checking it out. So Sarah hears at the end that he's somewhere around Lake Cushman. So she goes down there the next day and wants to try and find him. So she does that, and she talks to him, and kind of lets him know what happened, and but says, you can't say my name, you can't say you talked to me. I need to be basically out of the public eye. Also, at that same time in the morning, we get kind of introduced to something interesting where Sarah wakes up in the morning and she hears this like mechanical humming, buzzing outside, kind of oscillating, going back and forth. She gets up. What the heck is that? Grabs her pistol, goes outside, and she's looking around, and she hears it again, looks up. There's a drone. There's a small 4-helix drone flying around up above the tree line, and she has no idea what it is. She has no idea who sent that there. And so she figures that it's probably the government, like, doing surveillance on her. And she's like, oh man, that's all I needed was they're babysitting me as well. So that's where we get left in chapter 2. Chapter 3, moving on. Chapter 3 is called Messenger Pigeon. Okay. Once again, Sarah gets up the next day. She's going about her day in the morning when she's sitting in front of the fire, kind of having breakfast, drinking coffee, and she hears this tapping on the window. Goes over to the window and looks, and there's a pigeon sitting in the windowsill, tapping on the window. And she's like, oh my God. And she can see tied to the leg of the pigeon is a piece of paper, like a message. And she's just like, is this real? Is this happening? This is crazy. She opens the window, takes the message off the pigeon's leg, it flies away, and she gets this cryptic message to the next morning at 8:30. It says to go to Myrtle's Diner at 8:30, go to the back booth and meet this person there. And then it's at the bottom says JN. And she's bewildered by this. Like, who is JN? What is this message? Okay, so next day, next morning, she goes down to Shelton, to the city, the town, right? Goes to Myrtle's Diner, sees the guy sitting in the back. Okay. Another little Easter egg, African-American gentleman, a younger guy in his 30s, sits down with him, and he starts apologizing to her, and he says, I'm sorry about, I'm sure I've caused you some stress and anxiety, but, we had to meet privately, and I didn't want you to shoot my drone out of the sky. And she's like, whoa, wait a minute. That was you too? You sent the drone? Yeah, but I'm sure you're pretty proficient with your gun. So basically we get introduced to who is this guy. His name is Johann Neal, right? Johann Neal. This is Dr. Paul Neal, who was introduced in the first story in Cosmic Destiny, right? Paul Neal was the geologist aboard the science vessel, the Tyson, up in space, that discovered neothite, right? Although he didn't know what it was at the moment. It was called neothite later on, after supposedly they were destroyed, they were killed, right? When the neothite exploded, because there was an oxygen leak in their depressurized observation tube, and the Tyson disappeared. Okay, so later on, in honor of Dr. Paul Neal, they named this new energy, this mineral, neothite, right? Neothite, after Dr. Paul Neal. So we get introduced to Johann Neal. Johann Neal is Paul Neal's great-great-grandson. Remember that this is like over 100 years later, right? That this takes place. And they leave the diner. He's got a vehicle that has a hydrogen cell motor in it, so it's not traceable, it's not trackable, doesn't have neothite in it. And he drives her a distance away, then they park, and they talk about basically that he wants to find the Phoenix. He wants to pick up where Mission Phoenix stopped, and he wants to hopefully find Captain Wallace. Okay, And he says, I don't know. I just have this feeling that somehow Captain Wallace and my great great grandfather, Dr. Paul Neo, their destinies are intertwined in some way. And I feel that if we find Wallace, somehow I'll be giving closure to my family about what happened to my great great grandfather, because they never knew what happened to him, right? He says that he has a ship. He says, he wants Sarah to go with him. He needs her help, but either way, he understands. Like, she's like, still afraid and says, I can't go with you. She feels like she has her back against the wall because she wants to try to find John Wallace, but at the same time, she's been threatened by the Pentagon, right, to not talk to anybody or do any of that. So, but she finally gives in and says, okay, yeah, I'm going to go with you. I'm going to do it. He's got a ship. He managed to get a ship, a smaller freighter, similar to the Phoenix. It's like an older model. And so they set off to, first of all, to find Dr. Malenkov and Benny Benson, Dr. Benson, which were part of, Benson was a part of the Mission Phoenix, right? So they wanted to, first of all, go down to Portland because Joanne Neo had the same information that possibly Malenkov had been spotted there on the streets of Portland, and they want to go down there and try to find him because Malenkov has a lot of knowledge. He's one of the foremost scientists, experts in Neothite. So they wanted to go find him. And then later on, hopefully they could find Dr. Benson as well. And so that brings us to chapter 4. Okay. Chapter 4 is called Malenkov. That whole chapter is dedicated to them driving down to Portland from northern Washington State, and they go down there. They spend a day following this Cathedral Park Bridge. Okay, all these are real places, and they're looking for Malenkov. They can't find him. They go the next day, and they decide to follow the bridge all the way down to where there's this little beach, they call it, but it's actually a riverbank. And there's like a park there, and I looked all that up beforehand. I looked at pictures and I looked at how popular that area was. They find another homeless guy and give him some money, and he tells them, "Yeah, I know where this guy is," and he kind of points them in the direction. They go all the way down by the riverbank, and they find. Okay, long story short, they find Malenkov. Okay, he's homeless, and basically Sarah finds him, and he's kind of passed out. He's drunk, and he kind of wakes up and he recognizes her, and then they take him back to Sarah's cabin back up in Washington. Okay, they put him to bed. Next morning, he gets up. He's a little bit more sober, and they talk to him about what happened to him. How did he end up in that state? How did he end up in those conditions? And Malenkov, is pretty emotional about it, and he's very upset and very resentful and angry at the government because basically, if you remember back in the beginning of Volume 1, Cosmic Destiny, it's Malenkov in his office when he first meets John Wallace, and he tells him about how he and several other scientists had this working theory that Neothite is an alien technology. Okay, it's not a natural mineral because it's just too perfect. It's too perfect. It's got too much energy. It can't be natural. There's never been anything like it. They've never found anything like it anywhere on any planet. And it seems like somebody went through a lot of trouble hiding Neothite on these different planets. And so he says, but we got to be careful about that because that's dangerous talk. Well, they had his offices bugged, and he was basically kind of earmarked, like they were watching him. And basically, after Sarah's team with Benson and Dr. Remy from India discovered the wormhole, that John Wallace was pulled into, and the energy that was there, and they found the energy signal from his engines that seems like he was at full velocity, but his ship wasn't moving and it was getting pulled backwards. And they came to the conclusion that there had to be some element, there had to be some type of matter or energy within Neothite that was capable of opening wormholes and sustaining a wormhole. And so once the government figured that out, they canceled Mission Phoenix, and basically anybody with that knowledge was canceled. Basically, they were made to disappear, and that's what happened to Malenkov. So they basically dishonored him. They brought up false charges against him of basically abuse of power at Eon 1, and they disgraced him. They took away his PhD, took away his house, and he ended up homeless on the streets of Portland. Okay, so that brings us to chapter 6, Pomona. Pomona, what does Pomona have to do with anything? Well, they find out that after Mission Phoenix was canceled, Dr. Benny Benson, who was from Pomona, California originally, went back there after the mission. And so they found like credit card movements and things like that. And they decided to drive all the way down the coastline to California and try to find Benny Benson, which they do. They find him, and he's pretty adamant that they don't speak there in his house. He gestures to them to be quiet, and they leave. They go to a park a couple blocks away, and he tells them that, we can't talk about that stuff there because the government has our houses bugged. And he asks Sarah and Johan if they talked about any of this up at her cabin, and she said yes. And he said, well, it's all compromised now. The whole thing is compromised because now the government knows about it, because your cabin is bugged. If mine is bugged, yours is bugged, definitely. And she's just like, oh my God. So he's like, you can't go back there now. You can't go back to your cabin because they're probably waiting for you. So from there, now that they have Sasha Malenkov, they've got Benny Benson. So from there, they drive right down. They go down through San Diego. They get to the Mexican border to Tijuana, pass over, and they drive down to this mountain of the devil, as it's called in Spanish, where way back in there, hidden next to the mountain of this Picacho, this devil of Picacho mountain down in Tijuana, is where Johan is hiding the freighter that he has, the ship. So they get in it. They do this maneuver where they basically blast into light velocity right from the surface, and they go out so they don't get detected. Okay, so that brings us to chapter 7. And again, I want to welcome everybody. As I said, if you have questions, if you want to interact, if you want to say hi or do anything else, I just want to check here. So far, I'm the only one, so feel free to say hi in the comments. Okay, and so if you want to, anybody that's watching, contribute to the situation that's my dad is going through with cancer. As I said before, there are the super thanks down at the bottom of your screen where there's a little $sign there next to the chat. That's one way. Also, the channel has memberships, and there are other donation options that are in the info of the page. So anything is appreciated. Okay, and I'll be indebted to everybody. So hello, everybody. Good evening, and thank you for being here. And one thing I didn't realize, because I don't keep up on these things, is that tonight is the Super Bowl. So I'm sure a lot of people are watching that. And I didn't know I'd be competing with the Super Bowl, which really not. I mean, people have the option of watching the Super Bowl or watching this. They're probably going to watch the Super Bowl. Okay, not a whole lot of people are terribly interested in my stories. So. But that's okay though. I'm not worried about that. I'm not worried about the quantity of people. The few people that are watching them, I know they are interested, and they're people that like to read. Okay. So let's see here. Oh, okay. So right in between there, I actually, sorry guys, I skipped a chapter. Chapter 5 is called Awakening. Okay. In chapter 5 is a bombshell chapter. Okay. Chapter 5 is a revelation chapter because it basically reveals that indeed Captain Wallace is not dead. Okay, he's not dead. He almost died several times, but it reveals that he's not dead. And guess who else is not dead? The crew of the Tyson, the ones that supposedly died in the Spaco tragedy of 2092. Okay, over 100 years before. That's where Dr. Neo and Annika Anand and all of them supposedly died when the Neothite exploded. Well, they didn't die. It created a wormhole, and as fate would have it, they ended up marooned on the same planet that John Wallace was on. Okay, and they eventually found him. They found where his ship was. They brought him back to the Tyson and basically nursed him back to health. Okay, so John Wallace wakes up and he doesn't know where he's at. He doesn't know what's going on. He thinks, am I dead? Am I, at first he's, as it starts out, kind of poetic, where he's basically like a consciousness floating in nothing. He's got no body, no, he can think. He's conscious, but he's got no body and he's in nothing. So he's wondering, is this purgatory? Is this limbo? Am I dead? Am I not? What's going on? Well, then he starts to get the first feelings of like sensation coming back to him and his body coming back together. And then he wakes up, and of course he has absolutely no idea what's going on. He's in a total panic. He's crying. He's, just terrified. Okay. It's like waking up out of a coma, right? Basically, he was in a coma and he wakes up, and as anybody would be terrified, like he doesn't know if he's dead, if he's alive, if he's in hell, if he's in heaven. And this doctor comes in and she calms him down and tells him that they found him. He's still alive, and he's got a breathing tube in and all this stuff. And they take it out and they start talking to him. And so Wallace doesn't know that he's still on the Earth Hell, right? Which is the name he gave to this strange planet. He doesn't know he's still there. He thinks that he got rescued and brought back to Earth. Well, eventually he starts, telling them things like about what happened to his ship and the Neothite, and they have no idea what he's talking about, right? So he's confused, they're confused, and so in the next part, another revelation. A doctor comes in, African American man, older man, in his 50s, 60s, whatever, and he's like, do you know who I am? And he says, I'm Dr. Paul Neo. And then Wallace is like, what the heck, what's going on? And so, he like Neo says, evidently you got a lot to tell us and we've got a lot to tell you. So they tell Wallace that they picked up his emergency transmission, but it was a frequency that wasn't really compatible with their radio system. So they got like bits of it, and a lot of it was garbled because of the frequency difference, but they got enough to hear his name and that it was an emergency transmission and that he was on the planet. That's it. So eventually they did find him and they brought him back. They had to resuscitate him several times because he just pumped himself full of sedatives to the point of basically stopping his heart, right? And so they say, you're back here, the Tyson's here. And Wallace is like, yeah, but you guys were killed over 100 years ago. And, Neo says, no, we weren't. We weren't killed. We went into a wormhole and, bada bing, bada boom, here we are. And so, okay, now getting back into the right order. Chapter 7, we're about at the middle here, exactly the middle of the book. It's called Return to the Phoenix. So they let John Wallace know that basically when the Tyson went through the wormhole, the Tyson had a thermonuclear engine. And whether it was the energy from the wormhole or whatever it was, it nearly depleted the energy in that engine. So they only had enough energy to just basically like keep the lights on and the computers and stuff like that. But they couldn't launch the Tyson or anything like that. So, of course, light bulb goes on in Wallace's head. He says, hey, we can go to the Phoenix, where it is, and the Phoenix has a Neothite engine. We could go and find a way to disconnect it, disconnect the RE computer system, and the inertia canceling system as well. And if we can find a way to adapt it to the Tyson, we could possibly get the Tyson airborne again and get off this goddamn planet, right? And so that's what they do. So they get their guys together, Joseph Steiner, his engineer, Jeff Parnell, the chemical engineer, and all the other ones, and they go over. They go back to the Phoenix, excuse me, and they basically work on disconnecting the Neothite engine cube, the inertial canceling system, and the RE computer. They bring it back to the Tyson and they start working on that. And then Wallace gets to talk to the Tyson's captain, Ted McAllen. Gets to talk to him. They talk a little bit about what it was like back during the oil crisis and all of that. And, they get to exchange stories a little bit of how things were. And McAllen asks him how Earth was like after, in the beginning, with the discovery of Neothite. Wallace gets to ask him and all of that. And so it's kind of an interesting exchange. So that's kind of also a cliffhanger because they get everything hooked up and then they're going to turn it on. So we get to see what happens. Okay. Chapter 8, the pendulum. So at this point, we see in chapter 8 that Sarah Winters, who is now, at this point, if you remember, she was made a major. They go out into space. Johann Neo has flight logs from ships between Proxima Centauri B and Eon 1, right? The Eon 1 facility. So that each day they know when they can get in there. They don't want to be detected. And they can go in there and try to use this thing, which I forgot to mention, is that Johann Neo has been working on since he's also an astrophysicist. He's a geologist. And he has a lab where he was working on this device, a particle accelerator, which would potentiate neothite and direct it like a beam kind of, and be able to do a controlled opening of a wormhole. Okay. So their idea was to go find the same wormhole, which they left a beacon at, right? The one that Wallace went through. And they wanted to open that wormhole open it up, go through and try to find what happened to the Phoenix. Okay. So they get up there, they finally get to where the beacon is, they find kind of the distortion in space, and they start basically testing this particle accelerator. They start running tests and different frequencies, different cycles, different all of that, to try to find the right settings to get the wormhole to open up. Okay, the first day gets frustrated because there was a ship that came at a unscheduled time, and they had to tuck tail and run, right? They had to get out of there. Well, they got detected, so the next time they came back and they opened the wormhole, they get a message from Earth, from the Pentagon, and again, we get introduced to a character that was mentioned in the first one, which was General Walton, right? And so General Walton comes in there and tells Sarah that, if you go through with this, you're done. Your career is over. It's already over, but you're going to be branded as a co-conspirator with Wallace. And so he kind of tips his, hat on that one. He shows his cards so that they know that, okay, yeah, they've, this is like a conspiracy. And she just says, no, we're not going to do it. They go through the wormhole and they're gone, right? So that leads us to chapter 9, called Bittersweet, right? Where they find the Phoenix. They find the Phoenix, the empty Phoenix. They go into her. They realize that nobody's there. Wallace is not there. The engine core is gone. The Neothite cube, the RE system is gone. The inertia canceller is gone, and they don't know what's going on. They fear the worst. They fear that somebody got there before them. Maybe the government found him and killed him or took him prisoner, or they don't know what's going on, right? They know that the Phoenix was basically gutted, and why, they have no idea, right? But somebody got there before them. They find in Wallace's quarters, sleeping quarters, in his console next to his sofa and all that, they find the memory chip from his logs. They take it back to their ship, and they start to listen to his logs. And they kind of figure out that, you know, he was planning on, basically his last log, he was planning on killing himself. So as far as they know, he's dead, right? This hits Sarah very hard when she realizes that, because he mentions her in the last log and says that he loved her and he was sorry that he never said it, but oh well, too late now, right? Maybe the next go around. And Sarah goes back to her quarters and cries bitterly about that. And so then in the next part, we see, you know, Benny Benson meets up with her in the galley and they have a drink, and you know, he just tells her, you know, don't be so hard on yourself, and what can you do? You didn't know, you know. Okay, so that leads us to chapter 10, the sleeping giant. Okay, the sleeping giant. So they get the Neothite cube adapted to the Tyson. They power it up. So as Sarah and her team are kind of doing scans, and they want to find if Wallace is still there somewhere, if he went out, you know, he went out to die somewhere, they want to find his body at least and try to find out what happened to their engine core. They detect this surge of energy when the engines come online at the Tyson, right? And so they pinpoint that, they go over there, and basically they end up running into the Tyson, right? They find it. And they get a communication open to there, and they realize that this is indeed the Tyson, right? So they go over there, and this is where basically Sarah realizes that John Wallace is still alive, and the shock causes her to pass out. Okay, and so that's what happens there. And so let's see here. So then they're reunited. Basically, they don't waste any time in declaring their love for one another, and you know, one thing leads to another, and of course, it's not specifically stated, but you know, they go back to their quarters together and wake up together in the morning. So you know what happened there. So anyway, next chapter, chapter 11. Chapter 11 breaks away from there to another scene. Chapter 11 is called Siberia. Okay, so it takes us to another real location, which is the Mir mine, which is a diamond mine that's in Siberia. It's the largest, you know, there's this huge open pit mine there, which they're not using right now, as far as I know. I looked up some documentaries about it, and they're not using it. But next to the Mir mine, they have an underground mine as well. And that's what they're using currently to mine kimberlite, which is where diamonds are found. Okay, kimberlite's a real mineral, which within kimberlite is where they find diamonds. Okay, so basically, in a nutshell, what happens in this? Well, this driller stumbles across neothite. They find neothite in the underground Mir mine. Okay, and evidently this neothite, however it was engineered, is not reactive to oxygen like the other was, like the one they found on Europa, for example, or the other. There's types of neothite, same neothite as far as the energy and everything else, but some neothite is violently reactive to oxygen for whatever reason, and this neothite is not, for whatever reason. Okay, and you know, obviously this is just a bombshell. This is huge, right? Finding neothite in their own mine on their territory, has huge implications. Okay, so we're kind of let in to this information where all the countries that were involved with SPACO, which is the Space Coalition, to find this mineral, they signed later on what was called the Space Coalition Accords, which meant that all those countries had equal access to neothite from these other planets where they found it. And so there was no reason to fight over it, right? Everybody had access to it and they could take advantage of it. Now, one country, like in this case, Russia, having a cache of neothite in their own territory means they're not bound by the Space Coalition Accords, right? Now they have an advantage. Now that puts them in a geopolitical situation where, you know, they've got a lot more leveraging power now, because now they don't need to share this with anybody. They don't need to be spending all this money mining neothite on these exoplanets and moons of Jupiter and all of this. So, you know, immediately it's kind of, my thought process in this was, it was kind of a throwback to Chernobyl. Okay, not in the fact that there was any like disaster that happened or anything like that, but it's just like with Chernobyl, the Russian government tries to keep a lid on this, right? They try to keep this secret that they found neothite, and of course, that's impossible because when they, oh no, what did I do? What did I do? Oh, there we go. Okay, sorry, I put it in full screen mode and I don't know why. Okay. So anyway, they're trying to keep a lid on it, but the problem is when the driller who found the neothite, when he brought it up to his shift foreman, there were other people there around. They were going up in this, you know, mining elevator, and there's like 12 guys in there. They're all looking at it. So of course the gossip got out, right? Next thing you know, the mine is overrun by reporters, and next thing you know, it's getting out, right? The U.S. government intelligence picks up on it, and they get an emergency meeting together of the generals and all this stuff. They reactivate their like conflict room or their war room or whatever it is, and these generals try to pitch this idea to the president that they need to find a reason to invade Russia. They've got to get control of that mine, because if they don't, Russia now has an advantage over everybody and they're going to become a global superpower, right? The president's not going for it. He's not having it. President says, you know, you're telling me after over 100 years of peace, we're going to go in and invade this country, right? That we've been at peace with, we've had no conflicts with. That's crazy, right? That's something that, as a president, he didn't want that on his legacy. He said, try to find another way. Well, one of those generals was General Walton of the Army, and he's kind of an evil guy. Okay, he's the same one who threatened Sarah Winters. And after the president leaves, he kind of gets with some of the other generals and says, hey, we need to deal with this. Okay, the generals know how to get the American people behind them. Okay, they need some national tragedy. When there's a national tragedy, the American people come together. History has shown that over and over and over again. People put their differences aside and they band together. So that's, at that point, that's where the real Neothite conspiracy is born, because the generals, the CIA, the FBI conspire to assassinate the president of the United States. He gets shot at an event, and they conveniently find supposedly a Russian operative that was the assassin. He gets killed before he can go to trial. So there's public outcry. People want justice. Justice wasn't served because the guy supposedly committed suicide, right? And so what happens? Well, kind of like a 9/11 type thing, right? Oh, we got to go into Russia. We've got to go in there and attack them. And they find out that, oh, you know, Russia's going to use neothite to make weapons, and Once again, they use the old tropes. They whip up people's old prejudices and try to make it around democracy. Once again being in danger because of the commies and the red communists have once again reared their ugly head, and people buy into it. They fall right into it, right? So basically, that's what chapter 13 is about. Peace no more, right? Peace no more. As we get into that, the phoenix rises. They finally get off the planet. Okay, then we get into peace no more when the Tyson and Sarah and Johan and all of them with their freighter, they get back to Earth. And once they get connected with their devices back to Earth, all of a sudden they get brought up to date with there's war, right? Russia and the US are at war. Big disaster, lots of lives lost. And that leads us into chapter 14, which, if you notice, another interesting little Easter egg. Okay, if you notice chapter 14, or if you notice on the thumbnail, okay, the name of that chapter is Ultimatum. Okay, but it's written in Russian because the Russians are the first ones that give an ultimatum to the United States. And because Russia is about to fall, okay, Moscow is about to fall. The American forces are on the outskirts of Moscow, and so they know that their time is limited. So the Russian president comes out and says they're giving them an ultimatum, and also at this UN, the Russian ambassador also gives them an ultimatum and says, "You got 3 days, 3 days to stop attacking us, withdraw your troops, or we're going to attack. We will use Neothite as a weapon against you." Okay, and their idea was what the Americans mentioned at the beginning in the prologue, was to open a wormhole over United States territory and basically make the entire United States disappear in a wormhole. Well, what happens? The United States fires back with the same ultimatum. They say, if you do that to us, we're going to do it to you. So now you have a stalemate. Now you've got both sides with their fingers on the button, and they've got 3 days. Well, as Sarah Winters and everyone that's on there, they decide, hey, we got to get out of here. This is happening. This is going down. We got to get far away from Earth as we can. Okay, so they get in their ship, they get out of there, and they realize that when they get to this certain point and they're watching Earth to see what happens, they're joined by dozens and dozens of other ships of people that also abandoned Earth. Okay, one of them that did not go with them was Krieger Warheit. They tried to get him to go with, he refused because he wanted to kind of go down with the ship. He wanted to keep broadcasting with his radio show. And so Krieger was left behind. Okay, Krieger was left behind. He didn't want to go with them. So they leave Earth. Dozens of other ships leave Earth. They wanted to get as far away before, the Titanic sinks, basically. There's this ultimatum. And they sit there. Well, on the 12 o'clock midnight on day 4, they watch in horror as a pinpoint explosion happens on one side of the Earth. Pinpoint light explosion happens on the other side. 2 wormholes open up. They converge on one another, and they make one giant wormhole, bigger than the Earth. And everybody watches in shock and horror and wonder as Earth is twisted and swallowed up little by little into this gigantic wormhole. And then, next thing they know, boom, flash of light, the wormhole closes, disappears, Earth is gone. Earth is gone. Neo gets on there, tells the people what just happened. Earth is now a rogue planet wherever it went. It's now out of the solar system. It's out of its orbit with the sun. Everybody on Earth within a year will be dead. And so basically, the rulers of the United States and Russia condemned, 8+ billion people to their deaths. And there's only a few 100,000 people that are remnant of human beings that survived, the ones that got off the planet before this happened, right? So Earth gets swallowed up by the wormhole. It's now a free-floating planet, rogue planet. And that's where it ends. That's where the story ends. And that brings us to the epilogue. The epilogue I put in there for two reasons, because it was very poetic. I love this poem, which is called There Will Come Soft Rains, by the author is called Sarah Teasdale. And this is a tribute to Sarah Teasdale. And it was a tribute to Ray Bradbury, one of my favorite authors. Ray Bradbury wrote a science fiction short story called There Will Come Soft Rains. Go ahead and look it up. Look it up online. There's audio readings of it on YouTube. So if you look up Ray Bradbury, There Will Come Soft Rains, very interesting story. Very, very interesting, but ominous, dark story. And so at the very end of that short story, Ray Bradbury reads this poem, which I also read at the end of this story, about a war happening, and basically Mother Nature just goes on as normal and has absolutely barely any idea that we are gone, right? Has no idea. And so it's just a little nod to the fact that, the human race is very delicate, and, as far as Mother Nature is concerned, she wouldn't even bat an eye at us annihilating ourselves. The only problem is, in this case, it wasn't just the human race that is going to be annihilated. Okay, the Earth will be dead within a year's time, because now it was sucked into a wormhole and it was sent to some other sector. So the Earth slowly but surely will freeze, right? And everyone will die. Everything will die on there eventually. Okay, so we're at the end. So if you're still here, I appreciate you listening. I really appreciate you listening tonight. And stay tuned. Stay tuned. There'll be more videos on the CO visit about the JW stuff, of course. We're all waiting for the verdict of Norway to see what comes out of that Supreme Court hearing. That will be quite momentous, whatever it is, whether it's yes or no. And coming up within a couple weeks here, we will be starting the third and final installment of the Neothite Chronicles, which is called Volume 3, Earth Adrift. Okay? So just remember that if you didn't get to listen to this live stream, you can go back and listen to it at your leisure in parts. And remember that I'm trying to, raise some funds for my dad, who had a basal cell carcinoma removed from his face. He got that because 30 some years ago, he had throat cancer and he got 30 plus radiation treatments. And because of that radiation, it caused another type of cancer. Okay. And we don't know if he'll get any more. We don't know. Okay. But he got an infection. He was in pretty bad shape, a lot of pain. And so he's going through a hard time. My dad's 72. So, when you're at that age, it's hard. Okay. It's hard to go through those things and health problems. Your body isn't what it used to be. Your immune system, you don't bounce back as quickly from things. And it's tough. And it's hard to see my dad going through this. Okay. It hurts a lot. It really does. So I'm trying to stay strong as well. Thank you, everybody. Thank you always for watching. Thank you for being part of the CO visit. Thank you for listening to my Neothite Chronicles stories. And I hope you'll keep listening. As I said, if you're recently learning about this or hearing about it, you can go back and listen to all the audiobook readings of Volume 1, which is Cosmic Destiny, and Volume 2, The Neothite Conspiracy, which we just finished. And you can listen to those at your leisure. Get caught up before we start the third and final installment of the trilogy, which is Earth Adrift. Earth Adrift is going to bring everything together. It's going to answer a lot of unanswered questions. There'll be a lot of interesting things. If you want some inside information on that, become a member of the channel. Okay? Become a member of the channel. And there'll be some little insider things only for members. Okay? One of the many ways that you can support the channel. Okay, thank you. Have a good evening. Have a good beginning to your week, those of you who are working. And I'll see you soon. Be blessed and take care, everybody.